name is Joyce Raimondo, and this program is offered by the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton. I'm the education coordinator. Today's program I'm hosting remotely, so you do not see the barn studio behind me. I am in a different location today. And we have a very special guest today, Jody Cukier, excuse me. And our topic today is the intersection between loss and art. And I'm going to give a brief presentation about Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, and in particular, how Lee Krasner moved through the loss of Pollock and her mother through her art. And we'll touch upon some universal themes about bereavement. And then Jody will speak about her art and her own story of how she moves with loss through her art. So it's an honor to have Jody with us today. Would you like to say hello, Jody?
Joyce, I just want to thank you because there are a lot of things that keep me up at night, and my ability to use screen share is now chief among them. So I'm hoping that today I can walk people inside what it is that I do and how it is I accommodate really a significant loss, and how art plays a significant role in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jody. And we're going to come back to you, okay?
Okay.
And what's wonderful about our Zoom community is that it really is a community, and we are all amongst friends. And it's really an opportunity to learn from each other and be inspired by each other. So on that note, I'm going to show some of the work by Lee. What inspired me to focus on the aspect of bereavement and loss and art is that I myself lost my brother when I was 19. He was 25 years old. I was a young art student at the time, attending School of Visual Arts. So I looked to other artists who came before me to see how they dealt with loss. And I actually really felt that it was a life raft for me, because I realized that in my case, I didn't have to keep my feelings bottled up, which is what I would have been inclined to do. I could find a way to release these really powerful feelings that I really did not have words for. So here's a picture of Lee Krasner with her husband, Jackson Pollock. Pollock, of course, is known for his very famous drip painting technique. He's an abstract expressionist. He lays the painting on the floor, works from all four sides, dripping paint from sticks using house paint. And this is a groundbreaking movement in art called abstract expressionism, which rises up in the 1940s and 50s. And Lee and Pollock moved to East Hampton, to the Springs, and here they are pictured in their now famous barn studio. Now, Lee, well, first off, Pollock is a very good example of this idea of how do you release energy? Because when we're talking about a trauma or a significant loss, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you from my own experience and talking to other people, it's actually a bodily sensation. It was in my body. I didn't know how to get it out. So the abstract expressionist artist served as a very good example of releasing energy. Pollock said it was energy made visible. And it's a very physical way of painting, dripping, smearing, scraping, sometimes even in Lee's case, tearing up her own canvases to create collages. So it's really, art can serve as a physical way of moving that energy through and out of your body. Now, as I said, Lee Krasner managed Pollock's career. He rises to success, and she worked really hard so that he would be a financial success through his art. Pollock had a stipend from Peggy Guggenheim. Peggy Guggenheim also lent them, money for the down payment on the house, all negotiated with Lee. Now, why am I saying all this? Because you can imagine if you had devoted yourself to your husband's career. Also, she was a working artist in her own right. Everything is going well. Pollock rises to fame, and he's sober. He's an alcoholic in sobriety for 2 years, seeking medical attention. He starts drinking again, and he becomes severely depressed, starts an affair, gets in a car, drives with his mistress and her friend. The mistress was Ruth Kligman. The friend was Edith Metzger. It's 1956. He dies at the age of 44, and Edith Metzger dies in the car as well. Now, Lee at the time was in Paris. She comes back and she resumes her own painting in the Barn studio. And she's an example of not only of resilience, but as someone who could move with these aspects of bereavement through her creativity. So Lee says the painting becomes an element of the unconscious, as one might bring forth a dream. So we know when we dream at night, we don't know what we're going to dream, right? We have all sorts of surprising images come forth. So for Lee, painting was the same way. Her unconscious comes through, sometimes in surprising and even frightening ways. So Lee created this painting while she was working on it. It was called before Pollock died. So to get a break from her situation, she goes to Paris, France. She's planning on returning. And while she's away, Pollock has the car accident. And she calls Pollock or writes to him. I forget how they corresponded, but she says she's really concerned about this painting. It's on her mind. It's very disturbing to her. And Pollock reassures her and says, don't worry about it. It's a good painting. When you come back, you'll continue to work on it. And it's kind of haunting her while she's on the trip. And of course, she gets the news her husband died. He's 44 years old. And she said when she came back, this painting always really frightened her. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But you could see how it is sort of like a prophecy. The blood and the body parts, there's a sensuality to it, but it also it looks frightening at the same time, and it has that darkness throughout. So these are her paintings in 1956 following Pollock's death. Now, abstract expressionism, you could see she is doing gestures of paint and letting the painterliness come through, the drips, the broad strokes, and it's her unconscious. She's not planning it in advance. She's not painting from a sketch. And it was very important to Lee, the idea of surrender in art, that Pollock also said, I let the painting lead. So you don't know what's going to emerge as you paint. Of course, for me, and I'm sure many other people, this is very helpful if we're talking about bereavement, because it's a way that you can sort of actually paint and create an image and have a relationship with the image where it could speak back to you. And it gives a person and the artist an opportunity to contemplate their own internal state. And of course, it's a form of communication. When you then show other people the art, it opens up a dialogue. This is Re-Echo 1957. Lee's palette gets brighter. And she paints this Sun Woman 1 year after Pollock's death. Surprisingly cheerful. And I often speak to people when we do our bereavement groups with art. I ask people, why do you suppose it would look cheerful? And sometimes there is an element in bereavement, which for some people could be experienced as relief. If you were dealing maybe perhaps, for example, with someone who was ill for many years, or maybe the person was a caretaker for many years. Now, I can't read into Lee's minds. It's too it's too personal. But maybe there was an element with Lee where she was perhaps burdened by Pollock's alcoholism. And maybe in some ways it is a birth or a rebirth. There's a creative outlet coming through. But I'm just saying that as my opinion. I'm not saying that Lee said that. That's how I'm personally relating to the image. The Seasons, 1957. This is a very large canvas at the Whitney Museum of American Art. This is action painting. Lee is using large brushes, using broad gestures. It's like a dance of paint. And you can actually see her movement in the final product. That's what makes it action painting. You can see the action of the artist. And I personally found that movement is a really helpful way, was helpful for me to cope with bereavement, sometimes physical exercise or even dance. It seemed to be a release of energy. And also sometimes when I was involved with the creative process, it lifted my spirit. It helped me see beyond the loss. Now, shortly after Lee's mom passes away, and she does these umber series, and these canvases were created in the barn studio at night, because often part of bereavement sometimes is accompanied by insomnia. So Lee would get up at night and go into the studio. You can't see color very well at night, of course. So she eliminated color, and she did some really beautiful large canvases. And this is one of them. And this one I added to the talk because Jody is going to show us beautiful photographs of shells that she took. And I thought it was very striking, the similarity between this Krasner painting and her shell photographs with the patterns of the spirals on the shells. And so you might want to keep this image in mind for later. Okay. And I hope this makes you want to learn more about the intersection between art and loss. And ultimately, I hope it's helpful for anyone who is going through loss. I hope that this talk is helpful in a personal way. Okay. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Jody, and I'm sorry, I'm not okay. I'm not
Don't
good
worry.
at your name. Jody Cukier.
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 Mhm.
Okay. So a little bit about Jody. Jody spent 30 years in Los Angeles before moving back to her native Long Island, now living full-time in Hampton Bays. That's about 1 hour west of Pollock's house. Her efforts in street safety advocacy in California resulted in legislative reform and the relocation of 30 school bus stops deemed unsafe for the pickup and delivery of children. She is an active and dedicated member of the art community on the East End, having shown and sold work at Guildhall and in the Southampton Art Association exhibitions, as well as having presented her work at the Parish Art Museum at Pechakucha Night. Jody's artwork has appeared and been written about in several local publications. And my understanding is that Jody also has a degree in art therapy, correct, Jody, from Harvard? Is that right?
I have studied art and psychology together, and the field of art therapy through the bulk of my undergraduate studies.
Okay. Thank
Yes.
you. Just wanted to add that in because I thought that was
Yes.
fascinating.
Yeah. So there's some background in my youth about this, very much so.
So it's my honor today to welcome Jody. And Jody, if you'd like to say a few words before you screen share, or you can go right into screen share, whatever you are most comfortable with.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating to me about participating or having the opportunity at all to reflect on the span of thinking and work that has gone on since I lost Julia, my daughter. It's been 12 years, is that you have referenced prophecy, the first image of Lee's background that you discussed with us, as almost a warning to her as to what danger or what catastrophe lies ahead. In the month before Julia was killed, Ben Sherwood came out with a book called The Survivors Club. And I was very taken with this idea of what are the elements, what are the sociological components of people who manage to work their way through either during or following a catastrophe. And I worried about the kids on the west side of Los Angeles growing up in temperature controlled environments, growing up with affluent suburban community. What was their preparation? What were the tools they were going to use to deal with a loss in their lives? I didn't think it was going to be in the form of my daughter, but that sense of prophecy is very haunting for me. So again, in that intersection between art and loss, and with Joyce and I having not prepared what the content is for each set of comments that we're going to make, I'm a little stunned right now that you did that. And also in this notion of opening up a dialogue, just in sending around the notice for this talk, the mere title of it, Intersection of Art and Loss, I'm telling people about something that I'm going to do. And what it provokes in them is to tell me about instances in their life where they have combined art and loss. And the fact that it ricochets into that dialogue is already then the ripple effect of what it means to bear witness to your own loss and share it with others. So for all of you who are spending time on this Zoom today and may look at it in the future, I just want you to know that I have a great sense of responsibility to use your time wisely, and that there is a great sense of responsibility in everything that I have done, and hopefully lace that with a certain creativity. So that's my opening. And now that I'm halfway into the time allotted, let's see if I can breeze through.
No, take your time, Jody.
Okay. So now I go to share screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I go and find my PowerPoint. And am I sharing?
Yes, you are. Perfect.
Okay. Then let's begin. What I'm holding here, let me get further back, is what I'm holding in this image, which is a bowl that Julia made. Julia and I are obviously in the left-hand corner, standing in front of the Torah of her temple at her bat mitzvah. And I was there at the same spot 11 months later, addressing a much larger crowd. And I walked out of the house doing something quite instinctively, which was to grab an object. I wish I was far enough away. And I chose to start with the image that I started with then, which was how to anchor myself to walk into a conversation about this and with people, some of which I don't know. This was not a prop, this was something to prop me up. And this was a way in which to make tangible, which is what I think art does in these moments of gravity, is to put them into something you could see and feel, because the emotion that you're going through is so unheard of and unexpected that I grounded it with a bowl she made. And I urged her peer group, this is 8th and 9th grade high school kids, the group that I was worried about, I urged them to put their fingerprints on something other than a keyboard. And so at Julia's funeral, I would consider that my first act of art advocacy, that we need to make things, we need to think about art as an essential life skill, not an extracurricular. And maybe if we made teams like we do with sports, that would be universally felt. The kids were already on top of this. The sign here that is handmade in purple with artful lettering is something that a 9th grade boy posted at the corner and the intersection that literally is the intersection of art and loss. Julia was waiting at that light to cross for her school bus when the driver of the bus motioned from inside the window. I was in the car waiting to drive across with her. And I knew at that moment what she would think that meant. And she stepped off the curb. And that is like reliving the Kent State photograph when the student is shot in the protest and someone kneels at his side. It is beyond comprehension, and as it should be, because it's too haunting to live with. But there was a sense of mission and purpose in that happening that I embraced right away. And there was a sense of concern for the group and the community that had experienced really group trauma. And so we worked on change. We worked on getting the traffic to slow down. I mean, this is Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, famous for its speed and crashes. And what was this doing, being a school bus stop? It is not anymore. And the kids worked with IMAX that generously donated their art department to put together a flyer with LAPD and with the Brentwood Community Councils. And I quickly went to work to try to learn how to come up with an art project that the kids could work on with me. I had opened the doors of my home. I told all of them to come over, and we were in a mass huddle for months. And I felt a sense of responsibility to remain standing, to remain composed, and to grieve with them. And they supported me, and I supported them. And I met a woman who lived in Seattle, was a physician who lost 2 daughters in an Alaska Airlines crash 21 years ago from now. So that's 10 years before I lost Julia. And she opened a mosaic art studio, and it was a way for her to work with broken pieces to reassemble a life. And it's actually a very successful, beautiful facility. And I went up there to learn how to make this mosaic tile that's sitting in a plaque. I used that in conjunction with a ceramic piece where we mimeographed the sign exactly as the kids made it, because I felt that if I incorporated their art into my art, this adult, Julia's mother, was validating what they were doing, and I was trying to encourage it. Middle school boys were writing poems, were doing art pieces. They were filling the corner with their artistic expressions of grief and trauma. And how could I say, hey, great thing, this is a good thing, I'm doing it too. And so I made this plaque. I wanted to do a whole path with them in tiles, but city code, sidewalk, setbacks, a bridge too far. What I could do though is bring this notion of working with clay, working in ceramics as Julia did better than I ever could through high school. And I approached the Museum of Ceramic Art, American Museum of Ceramic Art, largest in the country, with their collection. And I said, how can I bring art classes to the students of Pomona? It's located in Pomona California. And we did a fundraiser, Teens at the Wheel, again, using messaging to also convey something of public service besides being a dedication to Julia. And I just think you might be noticing, as I did years later, that the photograph of Julia, which I did not use or bring with me for this tile, is sitting in a position and staring down at her piece with her hands on a bowl, not necessarily the one I carried at her funeral, in such a way that each mimics one another. And that dance between the two, that relationship, it has to now become my relationship with a deceased child, and using art as a way in which to bring me at least to that point, has a mystical, a spiritual feeling for me, and cemented what I thought my calling was. One of the things that was at the corner were these purple stones that had been lovingly painted, and the kids had crafted messages, and they filled piles and piles around that corner. And when the corner was being groomed to be more permanently installed as a memorial for Julia, with a big boulder saying, "Slow down for Julia." And to this day, I get texts and messages from people who drive by who do slow down. So important to me was creating a public service, not just a place that carried Julia's name. I was very aware of what I felt was the vanity of that. I wanted to be in a public place doing public good. I had those stones packed up and put into crates and shipped out to me. I mean, a lot of pounds, and lugged them down to the Shinnecock Canal, where I now live near, and built a piece of art for Julia's birthday a couple of years ago, and created some sort of fish creature to have the kids post on her Facebook page that they maintained, a memorial page. And while I don't have a presence on that page as an adult interacting with the kids, I do choose the 1 year marker, what I call a yurt site, her birthday and Mother's Day, for which I don't even know that I still qualify, but to leave messages for them and encourage them about the exchanges they were having. But I needed my hands not just on the well-being of this larger community, but for myself. And because I lived in LA and I relocated to Marina del Rey, I had ready access to the beach and to these fragments and torn shards that were coming in from the water and were representing how beauty can endure in nature. Not that there are beautiful things in nature, but that there's beauty remains even when they have been crushed and tossed and left behind. So I used these pieces that I collected to make what? My first construction, a bowl, go figure. I took pieces that were broken. I was going to work with just the elements that I found as I found them, and somehow build them around a form and take even ugly and tattered one, but they did something and they worked when they worked together. And that was also reflective of the advocacy that I was doing with the kids and with the community. But this, in the quiet of my own space, was something I did for me. And this is to show you how I built them from the bottom up, working in a sort of trial and error way. How many mussel shells would I need to form a bottom, and then let that design grow around a form without really any care to what was inside. So I'm working on how things look on the exterior without necessarily thinking about what's in the interior. And maybe as I look back on how I was conducting myself, you know, I was busy often with working on my exterior. So I took snail shells that I had collected on the shores of York, Kittery, Maine, and pieced them together, which was a much more arduous task because they had nowhere to go. Their sides had to all touch each other. And again, this form was very relevant to how I was rebuilding a life in the movie business, which I spent a long time in marketing. You would call that a page one rewrite, and I was doing a build back. In fact, there was even a point that a biologist made that became something that I wanted to think about as I looked to academia to provide some of the anchors to categorize my feelings. And regeneration is one aspect of growth. It's a primary attribute of all living systems. Without it, there could be no life. The very maintenance of an organism depends on it. And so the very maintenance of Jody depended on collecting and creating. And even though those are organisms at the cellular level, it was a metaphor that I could understand and use. And when I use lineal patterns of these clamshells, I'm weaving my life back together. These bowls sit on a shelf at home. And if it's the only place that they were ever seen, that's fine with me, because it's an opportunity to let a bowl sit with one of Julia's. And Julia made this ceramic bowl in 7th grade, which does to me have a very sea life feeling to it. I think it's a wonderful piece. And my white one is sitting on the shelf above. And now there is a dialogue between mother and daughter through the creation of art. And that dialogue, okay, this is a big sell that I'm doing to myself. That dialogue is my new relationship with my daughter. I have to find something that I can accept and live with. Now I'm 12 years out. This is not what I would say 2 years out. This is not how I felt 5 years out. There is a growth pattern to what I'm experiencing. I then take some of my creations and I'll bring them to her. This is her stone and her grave in Los Angeles. And I'll bring pieces to sit there with her, with my work, and put them where she rests. Collecting, I have to talk about, because of what it really does for me. It's breathing. It is communing with nature. It is creating solitude and focus. And it puts me literally, on the surface of the vast landscape of where we can be, where I live. And this is Shelter Island, Edgartown, Southern California, south of LA, and where I'm dressed for colder weather than I am in either of these other places. The meditative, contemplative solitude of being out there and looking for a specimen that I care about, that I want to pick up. I am so grateful for that passion, for that need, for that desire, because it gives me time away from everything else. It's healthy, it's restorative. And I really would say that wherever you are and whatever environment you're in, I was lucky, I was grateful that I have access to the beach, or that I have food on my table, or a home to go to, or friends and family that I can count on, that aren't about to have a bomb drop on them. I mean, I understand that I get to do this because of my personal circumstances and situation. And the fact that I can be grateful for anything when I am so pissed off and sad about losing a child, my only child, is an experience of context, of putting yourself against a larger picture in order to be small, so that I am small and my grief is smaller. Not that it is small to me, but I have to think about the scheme of things. And when I come home with the day's finds, when I sort them out, I clean, I collect, I collate, I find happiness with this. I enjoy, this is what art does. And if it never left the towel and it stayed like that, okay, that was a good day. And you count them in those kinds of increments. Or I put them in a tray and observe my specimens. I feel all scientific and marine biology about it. But they contained components. They contained eyes, noses. They were witty. And I put them together to create faces, using them as they were, cracked, not entirely sanded down, showing their raw edges. I began to create more constructions. But because I collected so much, I had to start being a little efficient about how I stored them. I couldn't lay them out on a windowsill. I would never live somewhere that has that many windows. So I stacked them on a tray. I piled them up. I made them balance in one another, and they began to take on a very pleasing, artful shape. And I then made another discovery. There is a sculpture at 54th and 6th Avenue in New York. It's produced by a guy at Pratt who is an architecture professor, called Seed 54, Harish Lalvani, which you see his name. And it's a huge pod, a physical structure that sits on the street made out of metalwork. And he did it using mathematical programming of how to make each of these sort of kidney stone shapes, kidney bean, not kidney stone. Listen to me, getting ready to sign up for Medicare. And these kidney bean shapes all of a sudden looked a whole lot like this piece that was a segment of the tray I was creating. And the only reason I know that it was a successful photographic image was because I was moving to New York and I was photographing things for my mover, and I wanted to have a record of it. And there I saw this physical thing that I was looking at day in and day out and appreciating it in another medium. And this became a signature piece of mine, but nothing more signature than, oh, you know, I did want to tell you one thing before I talk about my father being a survivor of Auschwitz, because this sculpture was quoted by Dr. Lalvani, the architect, as something that made him interested in the design principles nature uses. And he refers to Darcy Thompson, who wrote a book on growth and form. Let me go back to that. And that growth and the structures that resulted were governed by physical principles and could often be described in mathematical terms. Well, now I felt like this kind of concrete thinking, you know, scientific thinking, was what it is I was leaning toward. And that for me was a validating notion that what I was doing had some history to it in terms of the development of all objects. And this Darcy Thompson came up with a theory of transformation. And I bought this book. It's got the Nautilus shell on the front of it. I'm sure you all know the cover. And I thought, oh yeah, theory of transformation. Yeah, I'd like that. I'm transforming, I'm trying to be redefined. And I tried to get through this thing, which was really very helpful and inspiring, but you know, way above my Nat Sci pay grade. So as I showed prematurely, my father is a Holocaust survivor, and he was the kind of Holocaust survivor who liked to talk about it. And he was from Lodz, Poland, in the Lodz ghetto. And he was sent to the sewing room of the ghetto to sit with the women while they produced clothing. There was a factory there, and learned how to stitch and learned how to sew. And he often would tell us stories that sewing saved his life. And here is a craft, here is a piecework that my father is telling us about, and the horrors of the Holocaust, and how he could be rewarded by a guard for stitching or repairing a uniform or embroidering an emblem, and that would get him a potato that he could stick behind a toilet tank and steam, and that would be a reward, and you would never eat a potato adorned in any way. And I think that that raw, unadorned, undecorated attitude about his potato, I carried to what it is I collected when I found fractured and broken things. And it certainly gave me a perspective about thinking that there could be a knock at the door any day. That's what I grew up. They could just come for you. And that's how I still feel, a little more so today. And nobody would ever believe I am rooting for Poland right now, because I grew up with somebody despising Poland, being responsible for the death of his family in the gas chambers at Auschwitz, where he came out the other side of the bathhouses and nobody else did, because there were 2 lines. And for Julia to be named after his mother and not make it from one side of the street to the other, and the ache that he felt over that, it was such a heavy, heavy theme in my mind that I then used as a springboard for working with the kids and their trauma. And in that activism, in that need to testify, to bear witness, to stand up and be identified as somebody who has been through this kind of trauma, I was still bringing design and art and mechanisms that would help spread a message. And these are shoelaces that I helped create for Families for Safe Streets, an organization that was starting at the time that I moved to New York, which I became a founding member of. And because you get shoelaces in pairs, the idea was to hand out only one, because one was missing. So one shoelace to remember their spirit, and one to remember why. And with that group, I sat on a picnic blanket in Central Park and brought one of my bowls to half a dozen of us sitting there at night. It's the first time I gathered really with grieving parents. And I brought a candle and I lit it. And Amy, who is the driving force behind starting FSS, is holding it. And there is a sense of mystery and wonder that the group is feeling. And I'm beginning to sense that what it is I was doing for me might also bring a certain sense of peace and spirituality to others. And the woman next to me, Dana, hi, I know you're there, who holds this bowl, I don't really know her, and says, this is the first moment of peace I've had since Cooper was killed by a taxi turning in New York. I thought, oh my gosh, that is so powerful. It means this much to me. You mean it means this much to someone else? And this is the interior of a different bowl, a much larger one that I enjoy because it confuses me about whether it's inside or outside. It shows you what stuff can look like from a different angle. So I'm now settling in Hampton Bays. This is Shinnecock Bay. You could probably see Irene's house across the way. And it's sort of a Rorschach test view of Hampton Bays. It's really 2 images meeting in the middle. And I'm starting to think a little bit more about the psychology of what's inside what I'm doing, as opposed to simply doing it because I have to. And I walk into the Museum of Jewish Heritage, to the Auschwitz exhibit, and the photograph on the left is a room-size, wall-filling image of the shoes that were left behind. And that was a very powerful and emblematic image, you know, for anyone, and one for me. And it made me think about the sharp, dangerous edges of the shells that I was collecting, and my design construct that I wasn't allowed to do anything to them. I had to take it as it lay, because that's the hand I was dealt. And maybe I would reshape them the way my father reshaped his life coming out of that experience. And there was something transformative in comparing these two images together, not merely showing up as a result of anything similar in their own fate. So I took those whelks and I carved away the cracked exteriors, and I carved away the sharp, dangerous edges to reveal the quiet beauty that lay inside. It was still there. They had been walked on, crashed against rocks, thrown aside, left probably after their normal life cycle or not, and yet something was still there. And beauty found in nature, you know, is a cliche. The beauty that is sustained despite what happens in nature and what we're doing to the environment now, was a point of view that was interesting to me. And when I converted it to black and white, and it was pointed out to me that the image that had led Julia's memorial Facebook page, created by a 9th grader in her school, that was 3 particular poses of her last dance performance a month before she was killed. I looked at it and I thought, oh, something that I thought was kind of floral was actually a little more lyrical, and was perhaps driven by, in some subconscious way, her poses here. And again, this intersection, this dialogue between art and Julia comes about because of an opportunity like this to reflect on the work that I'm doing and what else it might relate to. So this notion of creating images that use the art that had come from how I was storing it began to come more pressing for me. And the way in which you build a tray like this, where the shells are ascending and descending at a point at which they fill exactly the tray you're working with, is a little bit of magic that's going on. I don't have a CAD programmer that knows the size of everything I have and tells me what to use next. It's trial and error. It's finding my way, as I was finding my way, in something I call form over function. And these are the shells that, for me, do feel like Lee's piece in the black and white, where when I pull the color out, they become something else entirely, a little more haunting, a little more linear, as opposed to the kidney shape muscles, black and white. And those faces I was doing, I created a series. Why the long face? You looking at me? Songbirds. These, I amused myself with my shells. I found delight and wonder. And as Joyce said about some of the work she was doing, none of them were looking to convey the anguish and the terror of losing Julia. They were my counterweight. They were the thing that I could do that gave me some joy in my life, that had nothing to do necessarily to the, new observer, they were what I saw. It's what I wanted to create. That middle one is the first face I ever made. And even as casual thank you notes to a group of executives that I met with about what I might do with my art, I put little dialogue bubbles and glued them inside thank you boxes. And I had fun with them. I wasn't taking them seriously. It was nice to not take something seriously. But when an art guild in Plymouth, Massachusetts was looking for work that could be experienced by the sight impaired and the blind, and people who said, gee, Jody, you know, it's great that you do what you do, and I like the images, but how about some art that people could buy that was the actual set of shells? And of course, the things that I made, you know, in Julia's name and in her memory, well, I couldn't give those up. Those weren't objects I was willing to part with. But what if I made them for someone else's frailty and for someone else's experience, or for someone else to have? Well, then there was a detachment to it that was for the purpose of another person's experience. So I created this triptych, Sea of Scallops. And I also looked for ways in which I could bring the carved whelks to a wall piece, as in wallflower. And what you see in the color behind it is a reflection of the outdoors. It was a particularly sunny day, and I set those in a clear resin so that they could appear as if they were emerging from the water. And you could have that, and to have that, you know, in conjunction with actual carved stems is a really fun comparison, because the physical piece, the photographic representation, they have totally different qualities. Same with this 10 by 10 scallops in situ. The little bits of white, those are reflections from the resin. And so I build the tray and then I unbuild it. I pour the resin in and build it back, a nerve-wracking experience. But when COVID hit, my faces came to the fore, and I thought, oh my God, it's a shutdown, it's a pandemic. What can we do to bring this message to people? And I created a face with a clamshell mask and pipe cleaner strings. And I sent it into the local paper, and lo and behold, it was National Doctors Day that week. And here we are in April of 2020, looking at 100 cases and starting to grow concerned. Very soon after, Passover Seders were being canceled. And what we ask on that day is, Manish Tana, why is this night different than any other? And it was different that year for a whole lot of different reasons than we're sitting in the Haggadah, the book that is read from. And when masks became this political firestorm, there was some debate about whether or not we would all participate in acts of good public health policy. I had to make "Thou shalt not COVID thy neighbor." And I use these captions to track my experience with this other tragedy that was going on, because of course I could experience that, even though at the same time I'm carrying the burden of my own loss. And cards that I made for friends, thank you for social distancing, or a photograph that I sliced up to represent shelter in place. And when archival paper gets sliced and it bends, it's heavy, that curve made me feel like it was somebody looking out from inside a set of blinds. At the same time COVID was occurring, something very bad was happening in our own local waters. They were happening in bays up and down the Northeast. Baby scallops were leaving their nesting areas too soon. They were showing up on the shores too soon. And although that's a creative abundance for me, and I collected like crazy up in the sand, it represented also a time where now it's been a long time out here on my own many days of the week. It's a long time of isolation. And what I wanted was order. What I wanted was to set these things into individual trays over and over again. And you could see over here on this black one, I had to rebuild that because there wasn't a way I was going to fit another row in there and finish that tray. But I also thought about a bigger installation where if I made panels, maybe I could set them up in a gallery somewhere, or maybe they could be used to raise money for baymen who are having terrible scallop fishing seasons. And this image, sink or swim, was if they couldn't swim, I would sink them up together. And these are really just 1 inch wide baby scallops that look, you know, like no scale at all when you see them as an image. Or ripple effect, where I should not be finding such brilliant colors in such sizes at this time of year, at any time of year. They needed to grow larger. And winter harvest, it reminded me of the corn that you use at Thanksgiving, the colored corn. And the shapes and the repeats and the patterns, I just needed, almost like the way you need to rock if you're autistic. I just needed a rhythm to deal with what was happening in the world and in our country. And in this piece, which is one of my larger trays, these are shells accumulated from over the years, and I'm showing you 2 views. The side view on the wall, this is a very heavy piece. I'm using a cleat to hang it. And it's a more exaggerated view of what this pattern is, and the ascending and descending, the back and forth. I had just such great fun putting it together, tidal wave. And so those bowls and all the objects and prints never did just sit on my shelf. Thank you, Ann Moore, for the gallery show at the Curator Gallery in Chelsea, New York. I put together the images and the pieces in something called Come Shell or High Water, moving forward with pieces left behind. And it was just an assemblage of photography and curiosities, as I call them, of the different pieces. I got to show all the heads as framed prints, each with their own caption. But clearly, he shells and she shells is a little behind the time. I think I will need another pronoun to go with that. So I will consult with those I know in the LGBTQ community, to whom I've given art to raise money for the Point Foundation, the New York chapter. I had a chance to present Fish Out of Water, which is a sturgeon scale and a little fin photographed on different colored backgrounds. Again, not exactly a vision of anguish that you might expect given the genesis of how I got into this entire series. And the bowls, many of them all over the room, people got to see, to hang with other images. And sometimes the intersection between art and loss is not about your own anxiety of the day and not about what's on your mind. On the left is a tiny little clay piece that a 5-year-old neighbor of mine from Brentwood in LA created for me when I lost Julia. So a 5-year-old is using the fabrication of an artistic object to relate to me, I think a 52-year-old at the time. And I saved that all these years. At nearly 14, she was diagnosed with a really dangerous cancer. So I photographed the little flower and I sent it to her mom as a way to interact with the grave news that she was hearing. And then when I came back for another visit in California 2 years after her treatments, I created for her a Sweet 16 card using little bits of plastic I found at the beach, so that what I could do is dialogue with this teenager about something she was going through in a manner that used art. And finally, in my last image, I'm going to share what I did for the Martha's Vineyard Museum this September. They are the stewards of the Edgartown Lighthouse. And 20 years ago, when there was a restoration for the lighthouse, they conceived of a base that would be made up of bricks that would carry the names of children who had been lost. And when I learned about it, I got a brick for Julia, and their 20th commemorative service was this September. It was the 10th year for Julia. So I approached them about taking the piece most emblematic of Julia and pairing it with a piece of writing I had done about what it is to lose her. And I will let you have a moment to read it. Joyce, you can read the text? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So those are my series of intersections. And it is my hope that I have said something, anything, that you can borrow the way I have borrowed from the models in my life to deal with the tragedies or even just the daily frustrations. It doesn't have to be a death, but I hope I've said something that resonated for you in a way that if you don't know today, I think someday it might pop into your head and be helpful. So I appreciate the opportunity to walk through this.
Jody, thank you so much. And I would like to just read a few of the comments as we wrap up. We went a little over, and
Sorry.
I am never at a loss for words, but I think you finally got me at a loss for words, Jody. So I am going to let the people who came onto Zoom speak for me. Meg says, I felt, oh, wait, whoa, the messages are coming in so fast. Wait a minute, they're moving. Hold on. Jody, can you stop the screen share for a moment?
Oh, yeah, gladly. Okay.
I'm just going to read a few of the comments. The fitting together of the pieces to reconstruct the whole reminds me very much of the artistry of stone walls in New England, Shona says. Rena says, and I'll spotlight myself for a moment too. Rena says, Jody, you are amazing. I am learning so much watching and listening to your presentation. So bright, so astute, Wantagh woman, proud of you.
Wantagh woman.
Absolutely beautiful. You are such a strong woman. Romy says, so moving. You are such an inspiration. Melanie says, wow, thank you so much for sharing this. Many people say inspiring, beautiful. May God bless you and keep you. Jody takes the breath away. Beyond inspiring. Thank you. Many, many thank you. Very touching. so brilliantly articulated. And many thank yous. I feel uplifted by your art, your spirit, and how you have woven everything together to honor Julia. You are an amazing soul, Jody. Don't make me cry, everybody.
Oh, you are crying.
So grateful to
Yes,
hear your
it's
voice and
poignant.
how you are in this world. That was so moving. Heidi says, love you, Jody. What a spectacular, moving presentation. Bravo. Your work is breathtakingly beautiful. Tribute to Julia, sending love. That's from Margaret. And Anna says, you never cease to inspire. And Lillian says, very helpful. Thank you. And I see a lot of hearts. So there's so much love in our Zoom community today, hopefully every day, but maybe a little extra today. And I really do want to express my appreciation, Jody, for stepping up to the plate and sharing with us your beautiful art, your advocacy, your community service, your memory of and life with your beautiful daughter, and all the time and effort you put into the talk really shows as well. And your humor. The shell faces, you know, they're really humorous and just beautiful. So
Thank you.
And I'm just diving in here and sending a giant hug and a kiss from St. Louis.
aw, yeah, we have people from all. Do you know Antoinette?
Everybody chime in.
That's right. And everyone, let's give an acknowledgement and a big gratitude to Jody with a Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you.
Yay.
Yes, Durrell, yes, Coda.
Wonderful.
Coda.
Exquisite presentation, exquisite.